I am not blind, nor deaf. I know you will believe me weak, frightened, feeble. Your father knew me better. Oberyn was ever the viper, deadly, dangerous, unpredictable. No man dared tread on him. I was the grass, pleasant, complacent, sweet-smiling, swaying with every breeze. Who fears to walk upon the grass? But it is the grass that hides the viper from his enemies and shelters him until he strikes. Doran Martell to the Sand Snakes. A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 38. The Watcher. Prince Doran Martell is the head of House Martell and the current Prince of Dorne during the events of the main A Song of Ice and Fire books. While we hear about him from other characters early in the books, he does not physically make an appearance until A Feast for Crows, when the Dornish storyline is greatly expanded. When we first meet Doran, though only in his early 50s, he bears the burden of relentless gout that has stolen his ability to walk, now forcing him to depend upon others, carried in a palanquin or guided in a wheelchair. Though not what you would call an old man, his illness gives him the look of someone decades his elder. His frame has softened and sagged, robbed him of the firmness by years of inactivity, while the disease has made an effect on almost all of his body. The joints of his knees, toes and hands swollen, a visible reminder of his frailty. He keeps a thick blanket draped over his legs and feet, hiding from view the worst of his condition. Yet, the concealment does little to mask the truth of the matter. His eyes carry the weight of a man who feels the strength of his years slipping away far too soon, and though he does his best to maintain composure, it's hard to hide the true impact of his condition, especially to those who know him well. Doran is a careful, contemplative, and discreet man. He tends to deliberate extensively over issues he faces, carefully considering both his words and his actions. Although many of his bannermen currently view him as weak, they would be wrong to make that assumption. Doran has long been dedicated to seeking justice for the murder of his sister, Elia, along with her 2 children, during the sack of King's Landing in Robert's Rebellion during the year 283 AC. Doran was the firstborn child of his parents, whose names are not known to us. His mother was the Princess of Dorne, with his father's house not known. Being the firstborn, regardless of what his gender may be, he was heir to his mother. For much of his childhood, he was an only child, as his mother had several tragic miscarriages. During this time, he would have 4 siblings who lived only a short while after birth. We know that 2, Mors and Oliver, both died in the cradle as babes. The fate of the other 2 is unclear. Doran would spend several years of his childhood at the water gardens, where he played games in the pools and fountains. But by the age of 9, he was sent away from Sunspear to become the squire of Lord Gargallan at Saltshore. While he was there, his mother gave birth to his younger sister, Elia. While she had been born 1 moon too early, and the maesters feared she would not live long, she did in fact survive. But Doran was still convinced for many years that his sister would die, as his other siblings had done before. The following year, his mother gave birth to a second son. She named Oberyn, a robust and strong babe. There was never much fear for his longevity. Like many heirs to Dorne before him, as a young man, Doran took a tour through the free cities in Essos. He visited places like Volantis and Lys, and even as far as Norvos, where he met his future wife, Lady Mellario. Doran caught her eye during a festival where the 3 bells of Norvos were ringing and the bears were dancing. They fell in love, and Mellario returned to Dorne with Doran, escorted by her loyal guardsman, Areo Hota. They were betrothed and would marry soon after. Areo entered the service of House Martell so he could continue to protect Mellario. I like it no more than you, but there is a blood debt, and Quentyn is the only coin Lord Ormond will accept. Coin, he is your son. What sort of father uses his own flesh and blood to pay debts? The princely sort. Doran and Mellario. A Feast for Crows, Chapter 21. The Queen Maker. In 273 AC, when his mother and 2 younger siblings travelled to the Reach and Westerlands on a mission to find matches for both Elia and Oberyn, Doran stayed behind as Castellan of Sunspear with Mellario. This would be Doran's first true taste of ruling Dorne on his own. Although Mellario, being a Norvosi noble, was highborn enough to become his wife, most marriages between nobles are political in nature. A love match is very uncommon, and some would see not making a political match as a wasted opportunity to grow one's power and influence, especially for a Prince of Dorne. In 276 AC, Doran and Mellario's first child, a daughter they named Arianne, was born. Given the Dornish customs of inheritance not factoring in gender, Arianne in theory would be Doran's heir and the future Princess of Dorne. Around 279 AC, Doran's mother arranged a marriage between Elia and Rhaegar Targaryen to spite Tywin Lannister for perceived insults. Shortly after this, Doran's mother died, and Doran inherited the rule of Dorne. An unknown amount of time after his siblings had travelled to find suitable marriage candidates, Doran's brother Oberyn had fought a duel with Lord Edgar Ironwood. Due to Oberyn's high birth and young age, the 2 men had agreed a duel until first blood. Both men were injured, but when Oberyn's cuts healed and Edgar's wounds festered, it eventually resulted in his death. It was whispered Oberyn had fought with a poison blade. Doran acted swiftly, sending Oberyn into temporary exile in Essos while things cooled down. Doran's sister Elia married Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the heir of King Aerys II, in 280 AC. She would soon go on to have 2 young children by Rhaegar, Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon. Childbirth took its toll on Elia, and she became a very weak and frail woman. When Rhaegar disappeared with Lyanna Stark in the wake of the tourney at Harrenhal in 282 AC, not long after Aegon's birth, it would start a chain of events leading to Robert's Rebellion, in which the North and several houses from the Stormlands, Vale of Arryn, and later the Riverlands fought against the Iron Throne and House Targaryen. This would put Dorne and its prince in a very difficult position. Doran was of course rightly furious about the way Elia had been treated by Rhaegar. As a result, he was slow to lend any aid to King Aerys. After Rhaegar returned from the south to King's Landing, Doran finally agreed to send 10,000 Dornish spearmen to fight in the Loyalist army, under the command of his uncle, Prince Doran Martell of the Kingsguard. It is believed that he did so understanding that Elia, as the wife to the Crown Prince, would in theory one day become queen, that her son, Prince Aegon, would one day be king. Thus, it was in the best interest of Dorne and House Martell for House Targaryen to win this war. By this time, it should also be noted that the rebels had proven to be a true threat to the Iron Throne, and not to be taken lightly. The situation was dire. Rhaegar died at the Battle of the Trident, as did Doran's uncle, Luwin, and King Aerys, believing that Luwin had betrayed Rhaegar at the Trident, refused to send Elia and her children to Dragonstone, along with his own wife and children. What makes the situation even worse is that after the Trident, the war had effectively been lost by House Targaryen, and the fall of King's Landing was all but inevitable. Not long after, during the sack of King's Landing, Elia and her children were killed by Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Amory Lorch, men from the Lannister army. It is debated to this day if Tywin Lannister had directly ordered their deaths or not. Regardless, the new king Robert Baratheon was accepting of their deaths regardless of Tywin's intent or involvement. As a consequence, Doran's brother Oberyn attempted to raise an army in Dorne for the exiled Prince Viserys during the years after the rebellion, but the new hand of the king, Jon Arryn, travelled to Sunspear personally to return Prince Luwin's body and to speak with Doran, ending all talks of rebellion, something that angered many in Dorne and within Doran's own court. The truth, however, was far removed, and Doran designed revenge for the deaths of Elia and her children. Towards this goal, he worked closely together with his brother, Oberyn, for many years, planning on destroying all that Lord Tywin Lannister held dear, before killing him as well. To this end, Oberyn travelled to the free city of Braavos, where he met with Sir Willem Darry, who had fled there with Prince Viserys, the Targaryen heir, and his newborn sister, Daenerys Targaryen. A secret pact was made, with Oberyn signing on behalf of Doran, and with the Sea Lord of Braavos as a witness, betrothing Doran's daughter Arianne to the exiled Viserys. Doran would later also send his son, Quentyn, born in 281 AC, to serve Ormond Ironwood as a page and later squire. Quentyn's fostering, in part, was done to make peace with House Ironwood, as the enmity between the two houses had arisen after the death of Lord Edgar, and the rift had never quite healed. But this caused great strain on Doran's marriage to his wife Mellario. Although their marriage had been made out of love, it had turned out not to be a very happy one, for a multitude of different reasons. Mellario, coming from Norvos, had not been able to get used to Dornish customs, which were so different from the Norvoshi. Thus Mellario did not approve of Quentyn's fostering, which is not something often done in Norvosi culture, believing her son to be much too young at the time. When Doran, after sending Quentyn to Ironwood, planned to send Arianne to Tyrosh, to serve as the cupbearer to the Archon of Tyrosh, which would enable her to meet her betrothed Viserys in secret. Mellario threatened to harm herself should Doran, in her view, steal another one of her children. Not wanting to hurt his wife further, Doran thus kept Arianne in Dorne and delayed his plans for the time being. Despite all the difficulties in their marriage, Doran and his wife had a third child, Trystane, who was born in 287 AC. However, after his birth, Doran and Mellario's marriage continued to rapidly deteriorate. She would never forgive Doran for sending Quentyn away. Eventually, she went back to Norvos, and has remained estranged from her husband and family ever since. Tell me, father, when did you decide to disinherit me? Was it the day that Quentyn was born, or the day I was born? What did I ever do to make you hate me so? I've never hated you. Arianne, you do not understand. Arianne and Doran Martell, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 40, Princess in the Tower. Arianne Martell and her very nature would also prove to be an issue to Doran's revenge plans. He had planned to tell Arianne about her betrothal to Viserys when she was 16, but he decided to keep it a secret from her due to her wild, spirited and willful nature. But unbeknownst to Doran, Arianne had read a letter Doran had been writing to Quentyn, in which he mentioned that Quentyn would inherit rule of Dorne from Doran. It must also be recalled that in Dorne, the eldest child, regardless of gender, is their mother or father's heir, making, in theory, Arianne the heir to Dorne. But thanks to these letters, she had come to believe that Doran's coldness towards her was due to the fact he wanted to disinherit her, and name Quentyn his heir instead. It did also seem strange at her age, Doran had no interest in any of her suitors or marriage prospects. Thus, when Doran suggested numerous aged suitors, the likes of Walder Frey, Ben Beesbury and Giles Rosby, whilst declining much more age-appropriate suitors who were also good matches, like Edmure Tully and Willis Tyrell, it only strengthened her belief. In truth, Doran had feared that it would be suspicious if he was not seen to be trying to arrange a betrothal for Arianne, and had only made these suggestions of elderly suitors because he knew she would reject every single one of them, thus keeping his secret marriage pact with Viserys in place. Doran eventually became afflicted with gout and became increasingly ill over the next few years. In 198 AC, when he was still just about capable of walking, albeit with a stick, Doran moved from Sunspear to the Water Gardens. 2 years later, however, Doran's gout had become far worse, and he no longer was able to walk, but instead was usually confined to a wheelchair. Nor wanting his enemies to know how feeble he had grown, he remained in solitude at the Water Gardens, where he was far away from curious eyes. At the Water Gardens, the summer home of the Martells, he preferred to watch the children at their play, sitting quietly in the terraces amongst the orange trees. He only sees his trusted courtiers and advisors, summoning his brother Oberyn twice every fortnight, and his daughter Arianne twice a year. At the sudden death of King Robert Baratheon and the rise of his apparent son Joffrey Baratheon as king in 298 AC, the new king demanded that Doran and his sons come to King's Landing to swear fealty to him. It's clearly assumed Doran did not do this, as the War of the Five Kings soon breaks out after the execution of Eddard Stark and the claims that Joffrey Baratheon is a bastard. Renly Baratheon, one of Robert's younger brothers, assumes that House Martell will support him during the War of Five Kings, and not Joffrey nor his elder brother Stannis. Tyrion Lannister, as acting hand of the king, offers to betroth Princess Myrcella Baratheon to Doran's youngest son, Prince Trystane Martell. as well as offering Doran justice for his murdered sister Elia and her children, and giving him a seat on the king's small council and some castles on the Dornish marches in return for his loyalty to King Joffrey and the support of Dorne in the war. It must be made clear that at this stage Viserys Targaryen had died, and thus Doran's revenge plan had become upended. Some assume this is why Doran accepts Tyrion's terms, and by the time Myrcella leaves King's Landing to begin her journey to Sunspear, Doran has called his banners. Once Myrcella arrives, Doran sends his armies into the high passes of the Red Mountains. While he has no intent to send his armies out to give battle unless Dorne itself is in danger, Tyrion Lannister hopes that sending the armies of Dorne to the borders with the Reach and Stormlands will make the Marcher Lords rethink their loyalty to Renly or Stannis, as well as halt Stannis Baratheon's eventual march north after Renly's death. Because his health does not permit him to travel, Doran sends his younger brother Oberyn Martell to King's Landing to claim the small council seat he had been promised and to attend King Joffrey's wedding to Margaery Tyrell. But Joffrey chokes to death during his wedding feast, with Tyrion Lannister accused of having murdered him. After Tyrion's trial leads to him demanding a trial by combat, Sir Gregor Clegane, the alleged murderer of Elia and her children, is named as the Crown's champion. Upon learning this news, Oberyn volunteers to champion the accused Tyrion, so as to be able to fight the Mountain and get revenge for the murder of their sister and her children. The Red Viper gets him to eventually confess to having killed Prince Aegon and then assaulting and brutally killing Elia. But Gregor uses the moment of distraction to kill Oberyn to end the duel. However, Oberyn was able to wound the Mountain. Until the Mountain crushed my brother's skull, no Dornishman had died in this war of 5 kings. Tell me, Captain, is that my shame or my glory? That is not for me to say, my prince. Doran Martell and Areo Hotah, Game of Thrones Chapter 38, The Watcher. In the direct aftermath of Oberyn's death in King's Landing, Obara Sand, the eldest of the Sand Snakes, Oberyn's 8 bastard daughters, visits her uncle Doran at the Water Gardens to inform him of Dorne's rage at Oberyn's death and to offer to lead a march on Oldtown. But Doran refuses to go to war to avenge Oberyn, stating his brother's death by law was no murder. He had volunteered himself as champion of Tyrion Lannister and knew the risks of doing so. Doran does return to Sunspear from the Water Gardens to show his people and those who doubt him at his court that he still holds power. Nymeria Sand, another one of the Sand Snakes, meets Doran during the journey to Sunspear and suggests working with Tyene Sand, one of her sisters, to assassinate Tywin Lannister, his children Cersei and Jaime, and his grandson King Tommen as revenge for Oberyn's death. But Doran again refuses this idea. Small folk gather outside the gates of Sunspear to throw rotting fruit at Doran's litter as a show of their rage at his perceived inaction over his brother's death. Inside Sunspear itself, Doran meets his daughter, Princess Arianne Martell, who had prepared a grand feast for his return. Tyene Sand suggests that Princess Myrcella Baratheon be quickly wed to Trystane Martell, and that Dorne then crown Princess Myrcella in place of her younger brother, King Tommen, as Myrcella would have the stronger claim to the Iron Throne, according to Dornish law. Doran, though, refuses Tyene, as he knows full well that north of the Red Mountains, Dornish law means very little. In order to maintain peace within the walls of Sunspear and in Dorne itself, Doran has the Sand Snakes, minus Sarella Sand, who is not in Dorne, arrested. The Sand Snakes are imprisoned in comfortable confinement inside the towers of Sunspear. He also meets with Princess Myrcella and her sworn shield, Sir Aris Oakheart of the Kingsguard. This is their first meeting, as he has spent the last few years in the Water Garden and thus never had met the princess, whom was causing so much trouble. Doran plans to bring Myrcella with him to the safety of the Water Garden and away from anyone conspiring to use her as a pawn. It is around this time that Gregor Clegane dies in agony in the Red Keep after it came to light he had been poisoned by Oberyn Martell's spear during the trial by combat. Queen Regent Cersei Lannister tasks Sir Balon Swan of the Kingsguard with delivering Gregor's skull to Sunspear to placate Prince Doran and to check on the well-being of her daughter, Myrcella. Princess Arianne, still believing that her father intends to replace her as heir to Dorne with her younger brother, Quentyn, concocts a bold plan. With a small group of conspirators, mostly friends from her youth, She plans to crown Myrcella queen and claim Dorne for herself, usurping her father and confiding him to the Water Gardens. But the plot is quickly and easily foiled by Doran's guardsmen, and they are caught by the Greenblood River. However, with Aris Oakhart slain by Areo Hotah and Myrcella wounded by Ser Gerald Dane, it only causes more uncertainty and chaos. As a result, Doran has Arianne arrested and confined for several weeks of solitude in Sunspear. Eventually he does free her, and they discussed why Arianne betrayed him. It is now that Doran reveals to her that he had been working to restore House Targaryen and had been plotting to kill Tywin Lannister and any he held dear since learning about Elia's death at his order. With Viserys dead, Doran now wants to ally House Martell with Queen Daenerys Targaryen via a different means, and this is why he has sent Quentyn to Essos to propose a marriage and to escort Daenerys to Westeros. The reason Doran had written to Quentyn alluding to the idea he would be ruling Dorne is by rights if Doran's original plan had worked, Arianne would have been Viserys' queen, and thus could not be his heir. Therefore the princeship of Dorne would pass to her younger brother. However, now with Viserys dead, and Arianne in theory no longer becoming a queen, would make her Doran's uncontested heir, unless there was another male Targaryen claimant Arianne could wed. Above all else, we must have Doran Martell. Small chance of that. The Dornishman is scared of his own shadow. Not what you call daring. Prince Doran is a cautious man. That's true. He will never join us unless he is convinced that we will win. So to persuade him, we must show our strength. Jon Connington and Harry Strickland, A Dance with Dragons Chapter 61, The Griffin Reborn. Doran has his bannermen delay Sir Balon Swan of the Kingsguard, who was sent to deliver the Skull of the Mountain by Dowager Queen Cersei Lannister. But Balon could only be delayed for so long, and he eventually arrives at Sunspear, where a great feast is held in his honour. Princess Arianne, now fully aware of her father's plan, sits beside Balon. Doran has also released Oberyn's 3 eldest daughters, Obara, Nymeria and Tyene, from captivity, and in front of the 3 eldest Sand Snakes, Ellaria Sand, Areo Hotah, and most of the nobility of Dorne, Doran is presented with the skull of Gregor Clegane. Balon informs Doran that Cersei wishes him to bring Princess Myrcella back to King's Landing to visit her brother, King Tommen. Doran is invited to fill the vacant Dornish seat on the Small Council that Oberyn was meant to take up, while Prince Trystane is invited to see the city and befriend the young king Tommen. Sensing Cersei's plan, Doran suggests that travelling by ship may be easier, but this unnerves Balon, who states that a voyage by sea would be too dangerous, especially going through the pirate-infested waters of the Stepstones, whom have gone unchecked since the War of the Five Kings. Doran agrees he is probably right. In a private conversation in his chamber, Doran reveals to the Sand Snakes, Areo Hotah and Arianne that Cersei's invitation to King's Landing is an ambush and a trap. According to a friend inside the court in the Red Keep, the party would be ambushed by bandits shouting "Half-man" in the Kingswood, and Trystane would be killed in the attack. Afterwards, Balon Swan would falsely claim that he saw Tyrion Lannister leading the ambush. It is unclear who Doran's source of information is. Doran does say that he himself had been suspicious at the claim of this plot until Balon Swan confirmed his suspicions by trying to persuade him to avoid a voyage by ship, as the plot needed them to travel via the Kingswood. Obara, Nymeria and Tyene are enraged, but Doran will not allow them to harm Balon or his companions, as they are under his protection, and also the protection of guest rights. To stop this scheme from coming to fruition, Doran has Balon brought to Myrcella, allowing him to find out about her injuries by Ser Gerald Dane. Myrcella lies under Arianne's coaching, claiming that the Dark Star had also killed Ser Aris Oakhart, begging Balon to bring Dane to justice. Doran has Obara escort Balon to High Hermitage, and is currently hunting for Darkstar. Doran sends Nymeria Sand to King's Landing to claim the vacant seat on the Small Council, and Tyene to the Great Sept of Baelor to befriend the new High Septon. While Doran waits for word from his son, Prince Quentyn, and his meeting with Daenerys Targaryen in Meereen, he hears news that a fleet of ships are sailing from Lys to Westeros. They are in fact the ships of Jon Connington and the Golden Company, who plot to crown a youth said to be Doran's thought-dead nephew, Aegon Targaryen, after taking Griffin's roost in the Stormlands. Jon Connington tells Haldon Halfmaester to write Sunspear. Jon plans to take Storm's End to prove their strength to Doran, in hopes he will join them. Doran in turn sends Arianne to the Stormlands to meet this Aegon and Jon Connington and find out the truth of the matter.